Sarah, should we wait for a bit at the beginning, or what's your usual the policy?
I think you're fine to do it just whenever it starts at 7. But like if you want to maybe give it a bit, it is really sorry, I can hear back. I've got it. Yeah, whatever works for you, really.
Beautiful.
Okay, I'm gonna mute myself. But thank you so much.
Ciao. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are people in? Is it just us? I've pinned you. It's fine.
I guess we can start if it's 7 o'clock. I mean, actually, people haven't yet entered the waiting room, so we should wait.
Do we need to just let them into the waiting room, or is Sarah doing that?
I'm not quite sure, but I think she's put us on YouTube, so people might be able to hear us already. Hello, if you can.
All right, let's do it. Hi, can anyone hear us? Are we in?
Yes, I hear you.
We're in. Amazing. Just give it a couple more minutes. Just we're getting little ping ups saying people are just coming in. So a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Ah, yeah. Hello, everyone. I can see some people now. Rachel, hello.
Hi.
Just we're getting little ping ups saying people are just coming in. So a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Ah, yeah. Hello, everyone. I can see some people now. Hello.
Hi.
Just we're getting little ping ups saying people are just coming in. So maybe what we need to say is, can everybody just go on mute until we are at a point where we're all talking? Because I can hear myself, my own voice, sort of like resonating to eternity. Should we get going?
Yeah, let's do it.
Amazing. Thank you all for joining us as we just start this little ramble basically about starting an audio documentary from scratch. You might know who we are, you might not know who we are. We're Phoebe and Redzi, and oh, hang on, I'm admitting people. Yeah, we started sort of collaborating. Well, we worked out today, it's almost 3 years ago, which is kind of scary how quickly time goes. But we have just had so much fun along the way, kind of working together, and we've got to work on some really, really cool projects. And, you know, if we're not, you know, blowing our own trumpets, made some really, really good stuff just because we've been lucky enough to kind of collaborate and work together. So we sort of wanted to use this session to just give you like a little insight into our brains and the way that we work when we are starting audio documentaries and making them. A lot of it is kind of, you know, we're maybe assuming that a lot of people are kind of fairly early in their career, but and so some of the information that we give might be quite basic, but even if you're more advanced, hopefully there'll be some things that you can kind of take away with you. We're going to try to be fairly brief because we want it to be quite interactive. Having said that, we have filled a gazillion slides with just us talking about ourselves. So we'll try and keep it fairly brief so that you guys can ask questions. Yeah, you know, it's not going to be applicable to everybody, but hopefully there'll be things you can take away and you can just leave the rest. Phoebe, you want to add to this one?
Wait 1 second. So I'm just adding someone in. No, I think only to say that, yeah, we won't take up the full time, but we will refer back to, in a few of these slides, the recent documentary that we made, County Lines, to show you a bit about the process that we went through to make it. So we'll be playing tiny snippets of previous versions, old versions. We went for about 60 million versions before we were happy with the final thing we made. So if you haven't heard it, it might be interesting to go back to it afterwards, and then you can kind of see the weird, wonderful unfolding process that we went through. And that's all. I think we can begin.
So when you are, making a documentary from scratch, the first thing you've got to do is come up with an idea. And it's really rare that you've got an idea kind of rattling around your head that feels like it has any merit, to be honest. I think, every now and again you might be like rock solid certain this is going to fly, but most of the time you're just sort of coming up with random things like monkey tennis, like full Alan Partridge sort of thing. So for us, this is the value of having someone to collaborate with, someone that you don't have to have a fully formed idea. You can just have a small little notion, a little snippet of something, and then in conversation, the more that you work together, the idea sort of emerges. Yeah, Phoebe, you want to talk about how we got together? Am I making it sound we're a couple?
So we got together in a dark club room. No, it was ELAN, which is the entry-level audio network, which I guess some of you are probably familiar with. But it was kind of a group that I initially discovered through Facebook. And kind of since then, I've discovered loads of little groups through Facebook. But I think stuff like that can be really helpful for linking up with people who are like you, or might have similar ideas, or maybe different ideas, and it can be fun to kind of experiment. I think I was really scared in the beginning of putting anything out there. I've always really struggled with that. So the idea that you could link up with someone and kind of go through the process together was somehow such a relief to me and made it really fun. So we're big advocates, I think, for collaborating, whether it's in a group, finding people to listen to pieces with, or to bat ideas back and forth, like kind of chain reactions. I think it can be a really good thing. So Redsy's designed an awesome survey. Redsy, do you want to talk about your matchmaking?
Wholly unscientific, but I think it's different if you're a little bit, if you've been in it for a few years and you kind of have started to meet people already. But if you're listening, basically like I was 2.5 years ago, and people going, oh, just find someone to bat ideas off, and you just think, how will I find someone? And Phoebe and I only found each other just through pure luck. So if you are finding it difficult to meet fellow, like-minded audio people, I've put together a wholly unscientific survey. Fill it in if you like. Hopefully we'll show you through the progression of this session, the value in collaborating with people and bouncing your ideas off people, and we will do a little matchmaking service and match you up with someone who you might get on with, or you might not, but it's worth a try, isn't it? So I've put the link for that in the chat, and we'll share it again afterwards. But yeah, that's all there is to say on that. We've also got a little document with links. So some of the things that Phoebe mentioned, like the entry-level audio network, and the Scotland Audio Network's a great one as well. They do amazing talks every month. There's various little Facebook groups. So we'll share that at the end if you just are interested in kind of meeting new people.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of going to go through the process of finding the idea. I think in terms of how we did it, we've mentioned here Audio Playground, Shortcuts. I've put in a link to James T. Green's podcast, which is U+1F60C, which is a kind of scrap audio zine that has all sorts of ideas. but I think the crux of this is that in the beginning, you might not have any ideas. That's always seems to be the scary part of how do you have an idea. And I think often until you start playing around or you start making, it's quite hard to know what you're interested in. So I find the more that I'm actually recording or putting stuff in my DAW, I kind of stuff doesn't automatically come to me. Going on walks, Redzi and I came up with, I think, all of our ideas whilst on kind of speedy walks. So that was where we came up with our idea for telling stories, which was a podcast, and that's how we both kind of started making, was through this podcast. And if you would like to listen to it, it kind of is full of interviews with radio makers who we admire, and they give prompts and bits of sort of audio homework. And once you start making, then it's kind of about sharing, which is the second massive scary thing. But you can, maybe get a little SoundCloud, put your ideas out there, and we're not saying kind of work for free, but I think it's not at all. But I think experimenting is a fun way to kind of get to know your own making style and get to know whatever platform you're working with. Reaper still kind of baffles me some days. I just find myself making all sorts of mistakes, but even that's quite interesting, because suddenly you might put an effect on it which sounds really weird, but you quite like it, and then you kind of remember to do it in a follow-up thing. I feel like Redzi, we're always discovering by accident strange effects that we like.
That is entirely how we've learned. It's like, oh, I didn't mean to do this, but it sounds quite cool. So yeah, finding your idea, part 3. A lot of why it's really intimidating, I think, to kind of come up with an idea is because you feel like this intense pressure to be the first one to come up with an idea, and like it's got to be completely original, and it's got to be like no one's ever done it before, and honestly everyone's done it before in some form, in some way. There's no new ideas under the sun, but it's what you can bring to it that kind of makes it special. So yeah, for us, it's to kind of get the ideas going. It's really important, sort of goes without saying, but that you read loads of stuff. So there's so many newsletters out there, and again, we can share some of these in the document at the end. Sarah will send some of them out. But like Lauren Purcell's newsletter, Pod Bible, Alice Wilder's got one, Talia's just started one. So there's loads of different things that you can read to sort of see what other people are making, and help you kind of go through that stuff. Listening is obviously crucial, and not just listening and thinking, oh, I kind of like the sound of this, but doing some close listening, like when you've done our perfect match survey and you find your perfect match, get a collaborator and listen to stuff together and talk about why you liked it. Just do like a little book club, or just write it down yourself. Like I used to just sit with my headphones in and literally pause, write down what was so good about that section, pause, write down what I'm feeling here. And I think that that's really, really valuable. It sort of teaches you kind of to be a little bit instinctive about what works and what doesn't work when you're kind of putting documentaries together. Before we go on to, I'll keep Google Doc. That is literally just, if you've got a little idea, even if it's not fully formed, just write it down somewhere so that you can come back to it and build it out at a later time, at a later date, because it will come to you. You might just have a little kernel of an idea, but it will come to you in a fuller form 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a year later when you're doing something else. It'll just always add to it. So if you've got somewhere to keep iterating, then your idea is going to sort of crystallize and become clearer. Before we go on to drawing on personal experience, though, we just wanted to play you a little clip. Sometimes not having an idea can play into your favour. This is the opening of a Radiotopia podcast called My Mother Made Me by Jason Reynolds. And this episode is called I Can Do Anything. So let's just see if I can manage to make this play. I'll just skip a bit because it's kind of long.
Thought about making.
Can people hear my sound?
Not because I don't love them like everyone else. I do.
No?
But because I
Okay, let me stop it.
Here's
I think it's good, Rosie. Maybe just turn it up a wee bit, and then it sounds good.
All right, let me just, sorry. Woo. See if I can turn it. I don't know how to do that because of the full screen stuff.
anything. Most people know me for books, primarily for kids. A few people, thankfully only a few people.
You know, I used to make music, and God knows I've made a lot of mistakes. But what I've never, ever even thought about making is a podcast. Not because I don't love them like everyone else, I do, but because I couldn't fathom there could be anything left to explore. I mean, seriously, what podcasts don't exist? We got docudramas, we got comedians working out their bits, we got shows about the makings of pretty much everything. Food, cars, movies, companies, a happy life, shows on family, how to start one or manage the dysfunction of one in flux. Shows on writing and literature and music and art and acting and architecture.
I'm going to light a candle.
Podcasts that just like whisper to you.
It's a pumpkin spice candle.
ASMR, USDA, WNBA, AFL-CIO. There's probably even a podcast called LMNOP about the alphabet of life or something like that.
Podcast gals, I learned from some of our previous
The biggest stories in popular culture, the biggest stories in unpopular culture, counterculture narratives about anarchy, because apparently the revolution will have a thumbnail attached to it.
What anarchism is.
You know, so we all know it's the revolution.
You're listening to Toward Anarchy on the Republic Broadcasting Network.
We also got shows about evolution. The evolution of the human species, the evolution of our interior lives, spiritual shows and religious shows, and shows about the differences between the two. Podcasts that help you meditate and mediate the everydayness of your everyday. Podcasts for children. Shout out to the kids.
Hi, it's me, Kian.
Some even run by children. Shout out to those kids.
What is love?
We got podcasts to help us declutter our lives, and others to help us learn to get every single thing we want. Podcasts that are scary, as in actual scary stories, and others to help us sleep, whether they intend to or not. Podcasts about politics, which oftentimes tend to be scary stories or stories to help us sleep, whether they intend to or not.
And the return of Joe Biden's economic...
Podcasts on sex and love, on crime, true and otherwise. And of course, there's no way to overlook the, I don't know, at least 2 million interview shows.
I'm Mark Maron. Did I mention that?
So, what would I have to add to this overloaded treasure trove? Well, turns out, not much. I'm only doing this because my mother made me.
We stop it there.
Here's the deal.
Oh. Yeah, we'll stop it there. So the point in kind of sharing that is it's just that, yeah, there isn't a subject that you can really tackle that hasn't been tackled in some way or another, but don't let that stop you, because you will have some sort of unique perspective on it. And you just have to keep probing and probing and probing and finding the thing that makes it work for you. Phoebe, do you want to talk about more about personal experience?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that I love that he kind of includes his uncertainty in that, and you know, his whether he has a position to speak or not, and what he should speak on. And I think this part about personal experience is just that, you know, we'd been wanting, in the case of our documentary County Lines, we'd been wanting to make that for a long time, and we'd spoken about it, and that Google Doc of ideas that Redzi talked about earlier. We've got one that's about 3 years old, and it's really chaotic and full of stuff. But finally, I think we were at a radio festival. We were at the IFC, and it was our first time there. And those kind of festivals are they can be a bit overwhelming, but I think they got our kind of, it's inspiring. It kind of makes you want to make something when you've spent a whole day listening to other documentaries. So we decided to kind of go for it, and then we just started emailing people who had kind of had experiences with county lines. So yeah, I think follow the things that interest you and that matter to you, because it gives you that extra boost that you need to kind of keep motivated and keep showing up to the idea if you really care about it. Redzi's included some lovely questions. What matters to you? What matters to your friends? What matters in your community? And it could be that there's a charity that you love, for example, that maybe you collaborate with them to make a podcast, or you look at your hobbies or your dreams or your fears and you follow one of those through into a kind of podcast or documentary idea. So I think it does feel somehow important that you're invested in the idea. Otherwise, I mean, it's fine to make something you don't care about, but it's more fun to make something that you do care about.
I've skipped on to the next slide, probably a bit too early, but
oh yeah, perfect. Okay, so in this next slide, we just thought to kind of speak a bit about that weird developmental process where you've got the kernel of something, and it's beautiful, but it's formless and it's fuzzy and it's at the edge of your vision, and then you kind of capture it. And I think at this stage, in our experience, it's really important that we talk to loads of people, or we talk to each other back and forward about the idea, because sometimes the thing that you think you're interested in initially turns out to not be the thing, or you notice in conversations with other people that maybe their eyes light up at a certain part of your idea, and you think, okay, I need to chase that or follow that. So with our County Lines piece, again, we reached out to people that we found on Twitter, and the process was really slow. It took ages initially. We had a few people who were really sweet and got back to us, but I think because the topic that we'd chosen, for lots of people, it's kind of, they're too involved in it, or it might put them at risk to talk about it. So it took us ages to kind of build trust with people. And so initially, I think we were just playing around a lot with our ideas using the audio that we could get. So I think we've got 2 little snippets here. The first one is me splicing together Boris Johnson, and this is just me being stupid. Yeah, we can play a bit of it.
Tell me when to stop, Phoebe. Oh, I'm not sharing again, am I? Hold on. Okay.
If Parliament were a reality TV show, then the whole lot of us, I'm afraid, would have been voted out of the jungle by now. Well, I want you to know, Conference, that I have kept my ace up my sleeve. We are committed to rolling up the evil County Lines drugs gangs. You've got to be compassionate. You've got to recognise that overwhelmingly the problem is caused by me. I take the view that it's a long time really since you've heard a government say.
Nice. So again, this is just, if you listen to the real documentary, it sounds nothing really like this, but all of this was kind of forming that initial backbone. And then we got very obsessed with the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, and this idea of kind of alternate realities. And when we were thinking, or when we were kind of conceptualizing the idea for County Lines, we thought, that was kind of helpful to us, because we kept on thinking about the world that we're in and how people experience it incredibly differently. And, you know, some people might have never heard about county lines, and for some people it's their life. So Reds, you can play the other clip in the background while I talk. This was just a weird little song that I wrote based on a dream that I had, where I was thinking about like the different realities that we live in. And in my dream, I think I had this dream where I was standing on the top of a tiered wedding cake, and I was at the top of it and my brother was at the bottom, and I kind of made a little kind of eerie song out of this dream. And all of these things are like, they're slightly embarrassing to listen back to, but they definitely fed into the way that we shaped the overall documentary. So the point of this is to follow your ideas, no matter how silly or small they are, and do something with them. So make little audio collages, because I think even if you never use them, they somehow filter in to your kind of understanding of the overall picture.
And it's also worth saying on that, when we're like just start talking to people, we did find people on like Twitter and other sort of platforms, but first of all, we were just like, right, who do we know, who we know, who can sort of connect us into people. And we ended up working back to someone who had like presented at like a company charity day that I'd been at 10, 15 years ago, I don't know, even just so long ago, who was really, really impressive. And so he was the first person that we called, and he signposted us to so many different areas and gave us ideas about so many different issues that we should be looking at when we were kind of coming to actually develop the documentary. So I suppose the point in all of this is like, it's fine to start with absolutely nothing, because that's the process, you'll find something.
You have to kind of put your trust in it, don't you? I think in the beginning, even of this documentary, I was quite untrusting. It got a month in and I thought, I don't know if we'll be able to find anyone. But I feel somehow if you just keep on looking in all the different directions that are available to you, suddenly something will emerge. So you have to have faith in your process.
So once you have found people, in the case of County Lines, I think when we spoke to Junior, who was the initial person that kind of helped us to think about all the different issues, and he runs a project called SOS Plus Project, which is part of St Giles's Trust, which kind of started out as a thing that was helping people leaving prison so that they wouldn't get sucked back into the cycle of crime again, but now does a lot of work with child criminal exploitation. But just in our really early initial conversations with him, it was clear that this whole like victim perpetrator line that people like to take just is meaningless, and that also that we could cast the net really, really wide. So we just cast the net really, really wide, and we ended up having 4 voices in total in the documentary. But how many did we record, Phoebe? I don't even know how many we recorded, and then I don't know how many we spoke to. It was a lot. But just in general, your contributor, you haven't got a documentary about your contributors, and you shouldn't want one just so that you've got one. You should want one because it's meaningful and it's going to help people to think about things in a different way, or just do something, just tell a story in a way that can be positive or can be impactful. And so on this one, actually, I would refer you to Telling Stories. If you haven't listened, the episodes with Jessie Lawson and Ali Adlington, they're both really good at talking about this. If you want to win the trust of your contributors, the most important thing is to make sure that you actually deserve their trust, and that you're being really open and honest with them about what the purpose of this conversation is, how that might lead on to somewhere else, how it might not lead on to somewhere else. You're not promising that they're going to get a full, a whole broadcast, that you're clear that their voices will be edited with others, that everybody knows before they embark on something, that this isn't some kind of extractive process, but that, you know, you've got the same aims and you can kind of work together to bring those about. Like I say, they say it so much better than I do. But yeah, you have to make sure that your intentions are kind of good and true.
I'd say Jess Shane's documentary for Lights Out on BBC Radio 4 is really good for that, in terms of thinking about what the way that you kind of work with your contributors and your sort of honesty around the subject, and you know, letting people know that their voices might not end up in the documentary. That's still quite hard for me, I guess, because, you know, we're still fairly new in, and the idea of chopping someone's voice out for me sometimes feels really tricky. But it just makes it all the more important to say right from the beginning that you're not quite sure, you know, you're not sure yet what voices will feature, and you're still in the kind of exploratory stages. So as long as you communicate that from the beginning, it makes the whole process much smoother and happier.
And just another note on like finding our contributors. I think we've mentioned that we sort of trawled social media, but we kind of we split it actually, didn't we, on the County Lines documentary? And I think I did the social media stuff, and then you spoke to every charity under the sun to kind of see if they had some insights or people they could connect you with, and so on and so forth. And that leads us nicely, I think, onto this slide.
Yeah, we're just going to play a wee clip of this just to show the kind of range of interviews that we did that didn't make it into the final thing.
That's okay, guys. How you all doing? You all right? Yeah? No. I've got... When did you get your results? Oh, now is it? I'm 12. I've got coming to see how you doing, buddy? Right. I've got a lady from BBC Radio 4 called Phoebe on the line here, and I'm just saying how well like young people around here are doing in terms of like coming out and going and doing things.
This was the strangest experience for me. I'd expected it to be a kind of traditional Zoom meeting. You can pause it there, Redzi. And I was wanting to speak to police officers about how they kind of work with young people who've been involved in county lines.
Yeah,
I just got this. Oh, pause it, Redzi. I can't bear to see my face. But yeah, it was just this kind of fascinating process of the more you kind of open up the net, you have these really interesting interactions. You know, I loved that he just got his phone out and was kind of taking me around on the beat with him. And although these didn't feed into the story, I think they really helped us to kind of build a more nuanced picture of the kind of issue that we were describing. And yeah, as I said before, it's hard to say goodbye to some interviews. We did a fantastic one with this teacher who works in schools, and halfway through the interview, her daughter comes in and said that someone at school had been stabbed and had been kind of involved in a kind of county line stabbing. All of this was kind of really poignant for showing how much of an issue county lines is and how present it is, but it wasn't right for the story that we were telling. So I think
just watch it in there. You're gonna miss it. Why don't you just watch it in there?
Yeah, so sometimes you have to accept that you're just going to give people a snapshot, and that, you know, they might only be looking at the top of the iceberg, but it felt good for us, I think, to go into all of the different stories underneath it. Anything else to add to that, Redzi? I think we can move on to the next.
So this idea is this slide rather is kind of talking about actually we were quite experimental in this, in the way that we interviewed people, and sort of down the bottom left hand corner of the slide you'll see this little card. So Phoebe made loads of little cards, almost sort of like tarot card kind of inspired, little prompts and things like that we kind of gave to some of the people we were interviewing, and just asked them to talk and sort of see where it led us. And the other thing that we were sort of, I think once we started really doing the research and looking into the issue of county lines, it was just so clear that that nothing was clear, and that it was we were starting to think about it in terms of like a game of Jenga, like this bit's holding up only because of that bit under there, and if that pulls out or moves away or collapses, then the whole thing does. So we literally for at least one of the interviews, took a game of Jenga and asked people to push the blocks. And when they were talking about things, which sounds like it sounds a lot, doesn't it? But it got us some really interesting stuff and just helped us to really think about the different ways that we could tell the story and what was important. So even though it feels a bit like a sort of corporate away day, sometimes it is worth doing these little things that just kind of give you little creative prompts and allow you like a new way into the person that you're talking to.
I think that's right. I think it can be quite fun just to change up the interview style. Also, because sometimes people aren't expecting it. If you start your interview with a drawing exercise or something that's going to shift their brain into a slightly different space, it can really sort of open them up, or they let some kind of guard down because they're no longer so much focused on what they're saying. They're kind of doing something else. And sometimes that, I don't know, that made people feel comfortable and, you know, got them to approach the subject in different creative ways. Yeah. Then we had we will sometimes take a song or a film that we find inspiring once we've got the interviews, and we'll use that to help us shape the kind of documentary style. So Redzi, do you want to talk about your favorite, the song that you found?
Which we actually didn't do in this one, did we? But it's going to come up sometime soon. We were listening to it a lot. It's Green Eyes by Erykah Badu from the album Mama's Gun, but it's like a 10-minute song that changes genre 2-3 times like during the sort of course of it, and it's just a really interesting sort of form of storytelling. So I think we were sort of listening to it a fair bit and thinking, I think this is coupled with like the absurdity of it all that we had in our heads, going along with Everything Everywhere All at Once and those kind of influences, that the whole system is so absurd that we wanted to sort of see if we could highlight it through switching things up and making things a bit unexpected. So even though, you know, that you could not listen to that song and listen to our documentary and draw a direct line, it was there as an inspiration for us and as something that we wanted to just keep in our minds as we were making it.
And I think that can be quite a relief sometimes, you know, when you're a bit overwhelmed and you've listened to a million documentaries for inspiration, to go away and watch a film or listen to a song and think, that's really clever what they've done with that form, and how could I use something of that in the documentary that we're making? So I think the point of that is don't feel bound to just audio for your inspiration. You can spread your net wide, and it can be quite fun to think about. Or even a landscape, like I love this landscape, what would that sound like? It's kind of constantly an act of translation, which it's exciting to challenge yourself like that, and to think, how could I be inspired by that and take it into the documentary that I'm making?
Should we talk a bit at this point about kind of making the music and the sort of soundscape and experimenting with that, Phoebe?
Yeah. I think again for this, we, like the Google Doc, we'll start, for a while collecting music that we like, or documentaries that we like. So I think we've been listening to a lot of the sound artist Nyakabi Karaoke, and she does these beautiful kind of humming soundscapes. And so I feel like with Redzi and I, we have a tendency to put so much in at the beginning, and then we have to kind of peel back. So we'll send each other WhatsApp notes backwards and forwards with, what do you think about this part for this bit of music, sound design? And we were having a giggle earlier because a lot of our kind of WhatsApp chats back and forth, we'll listen on the go or while we're driving. And sometimes one of us will send a slightly passive aggressive message being like what you've done here, but the horns in this section or this loud crashing noise just completely ruins the mood. And it would just be sounds filtering in from the outside.
Yeah, like the worst one is like, why have you put a knocking door here? Why on earth is there a massive like knocking door? And then you realize someone's just knocking on your front door and you need to just go and answer it. The number of times I've got quite mad at Phoebe for putting in knocking doors when there aren't any.
But I think, so we'll tend to use free sound to get sound and kind of build up the soundscape slowly. Or in the case of County Lines, a lot of it was on GarageBand. So a lot of it is just me kind of doing into my laptop and then layering it up over and over. And we'll talk more a bit later about kind of how we use bits of language in the interviews to kind of inspire the sounds that we use. But I think the fairest point to say is that we tend to overload and overcrowd in the beginning, and then we peel back a bit. And it's a lot of experimentation, which can be really fun. So I think, that would be our top advice, is just to go a bit wild in the beginning and see what sounds nice. And then slowly you'll find a kind of style that works for you. Or a sound that you keep on returning back to that somehow really captures your imagination.
This is you again, Phoebe, like experimenting with free writing. This was some of Phoebe's kind of early free writing that ended up making it into the final. These are just some questions. It's probably better if you explain it, Phoebe, but
we were just thinking, early on my voice wasn't going to be in the documentary at all, but still we were doing bits of writing around it just to see what we were most interested in. And I think this can be a good practice for whatever you're making. Give yourself a pen and some paper and just write down the questions of what matters to you in the documentary that you're making. And so these were questions that I'd written to my brother, and it was helpful for us to kind of then come back to these questions, and we decided actually that we would use some of them to kind of break up the kind of weave through the documentary. So if it helps you, write down your questions. Sometimes using a refrain can be helpful. So I also did a free writing exercise with the refrain I remember. And I wrote down as many memories as I could think of my brother, just really small things like, I remember how your hair curled up in the bath when it was wet, or I remember how you used to heave up your body when you laughed. And I think all of these things just help you get a little bit closer every time to the thing that you're interested in, or the thing that matters to you. Or maybe it's, invites uncertainty. You're never going to kind of answer all the questions that you want to answer through your documentary. But if you kind of open up questions, that can also be exciting.
And I think these questions gave us like a lot of the sonic, a chunk of the sonic identity, didn't they? Because it was that bit. Phoebe had said, do you still listen to Gold Dust? It was one of the questions that she'd written. But then when she kind of like recorded it to send it to me, it was, she started singing it too. And we were like, oh, we can totally pop this in and turn it into a little bit of a dirty sort of drum and bass thing where we've got this complete contrast between the horrors of what's happening and the naivety of people who aren't quite in it, who are kind of outside of it. And so that's not anything we could ever have planned to do. It just came out of this free writing exercise. So it's just worth doing these little things and playing and seeing where it takes you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Then you get into the editing stage of the documentary, and we've put the power of naming here because I think sometimes having a title can really steer you in terms of what you decide to edit in or out. And as we were making County Lines, we went through a whole bunch of different titles. The first one was something that I think Redzy's brother-in-law had said to you in the car. Wasn't it, Redzy? He said, "Oh,
what's that?"
Yeah, I remember he said to you, "How the others live." Oh, how the others live, or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. For a long time, in fact, even still now, everything on my computer's named as the others because it was like a thing about how, yeah, people just assume this is a world away when it's actually going on everywhere. So that was one of them. And then, yeah, Welcome to Our World was one of them as well, because it was just like, yeah, I think for us, it was just that I keep saying the word, but just the absurdity of a lot of people like just nicely living their lives and assuming that this is nowhere on their doorsteps when it really, really is. But it helped us just to think about how, like, where we were going.
Yeah.
But at this point, we had done very, very, very many interviews and had lots and lots and lots of tape. And this is the part where, yeah, you just kind of start editing, putting it all together. I always kind of do a thing like, I think it's fair to say, like, Phoebe, you're really good at just taking a section and playing with it, like experimenting kind of an audio thing. And then I always tend to go, right, which bits of audio fit into which themes? And so between us, we can kind of come up with something that sounds interesting and kind of gets to the heart of what we think we're trying to say, even if we don't know what we're trying to say at that point.
And that's the joy again of collaborating, because different people, Redzy's fantastic at structure and kind of building a story, and just having two minds on something is great, because sometimes I listen to a piece of audio over and over, and in the end I think, I don't even know if that makes sense anymore. And so I don't know, it's comforting to work with someone who says, okay, yeah, that actually doesn't make sense now that we're missing this, so we have to now kind of bring in something else. So we had to do a lot of cutting and losing of voices, didn't we, Redzy, in that stage?
Yes, yeah, lost a lot of voices, but I think was worthwhile. And actually, at this point, it's worth also mentioning that like having a really good exec helps with that, because as Phoebe said, it's not like because there were two of us, we suddenly didn't have that same problem. We were both sort of going at points, weren't we? Is this even interesting? Like, you sort of become a little bit desensitized in a way to the voices that you're hearing over and over and over again in this process. So this is where a third ear or just another outside ear can really, really help you kind of bring it back into focus a little bit.
And should we play, Redzy? We've got one of the key voices that we took out, just because it's probably interesting if you go away and listen to the documentary to hear what we cut. So here's what we cut.
If people actually took a moment and observed, I had real empathy, like they were able to put themselves in the shoes of the families and the people and the situations that are out there, it would probably make them feel very...
Oh, sorry, if I clicked on something.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. That gave the idea of it.
I can play it again.
If people
skip ahead a little bit,
like they were able to put themselves in the shoes of the families and the people and the situations that are out there, it would probably make them feel very uncomfortable. they don't want to be in that space where they can feel uncomfortable. 5 my first gun before I was about 8 years old. A guy passed me a gun in the community. He was on the top of a block of flats. Like, the gun was very heavy, and then when I fired, it didn't sound like something off of Call of Duty or off of a movie. It sounded like a firework. In fact, the recoil from the gun almost hit my face.
Yeah, so as you can hear, that was a really like affecting piece of audio, but it still just, you know, wasn't gonna gel in this one so much.
And I think Junior was also really honest when we interviewed him and said that because his experience was, I think, 10 years ago now, he kind of encouraged us to interview people who'd had more recent experience.
Yeah.
But one thing that I'll just add from that whole interview process is it can be really emotional, of course, when you're actually also in that interview frame and you're listening to people's stories. So take care of the person that you're interviewing and also take care of yourself. I mean, I'm sure that there was at least 4 interviews that I kind of cried my way through, or you know, it was really emotional somehow. So take care of yourself. Sonic identity. We've done a fair bit of this already. We've talked about, you know, you can hear from that last Junior clip that it sounds very different to kind of how we ended up you know, we had piano there. We ended up going for much more kind of industrial city sounds to kind of bring this idea of a world to life. And one way that we kind of sometimes will choose our soundscapes is we'll listen back to the interview and we'll be kind of instructed by the words. So there was a part in one of our interviews with a contributor called Jess, and she talks about she was held hostage in her house for 6 months. And when she was released by the police kind of came to her house and she thought she was being rescued by the police. And she has this line where she says, "I was floating with happiness." And Redzi and I, when we listened back to that bit of interview, thought it would be, thought that we could use sound to kind of enhance what she was saying. So we tried to create something that gave the impression of feeling very constricted to then feeling lighter. I'm not sure if we succeeded, but it's interesting to kind of, see if there are clues in the interviews for how you might want to go about your soundscapes, and then experiment. So our Reaper ends up looking incredibly chaotic. Not Redzi's. Redzi's is pretty, but we'll put sound over sound over sound.
Mine is all color coded.
Redzi's is color coded and mine's a mess. So, but have fun with it, and that can be one of the, I think that for us is an exciting stage where we're creating music or taking samples or using our voice. That can be a really fun part of the process. So have a play. There are loads of videos on, you know, how to use Reaper. Go on Freesound, record funny sounds on your phone that are, you know, weird whistles and bits of wind and rumbles, and you can build that all up and use it for your music. So maybe have a file on your laptop for the funny sounds that you collect along the journey.
This bit, is it making sense, Phoebe, actually, if we just skip ahead to the end and then come back to this one?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to skip ahead and then we'll come back. Yes, our basic takeaways are just start recording things and start playing around. And you don't have to have a huge, gigantic story, like record your mum and record your housemates and just talk to people and record them and then play with their voices and see where it kind of leads you. And that doesn't mean like spend all your life working for free. It just means whenever you get a chance, kind of work on your own skills development. Yeah, find people that you can kind of speak to who will give you kind of honest feedback about what it is that you're doing and what you're working on, and even better if they're into the same sorts of things and it's somebody who likes to make audio too. And at this point, I will give another little shout out for our highly scientific survey if you're looking for a creative match.
I think also don't worry too much about if your ideas do. So often I listen back to my work and I think it sounds silly or chaotic or like there's too much going on. And maybe there is, but it's still your kind of way of expressing yourself. So I think try not to censor yourself, especially in the beginning. And then, you know, call on, as Rezi said, the people that you trust. For me, it's always my mum telling me that, not, you know, it doesn't make any sense, or it's too poetic, or I don't understand what you're getting at here.
Or my kids going, I think there's a bit much going on, Mum. Obviously, they don't get to hear everything, but yes. And yeah, this was Phoebe's final line, and it's very, very apt, I think, for us, is like, don't be afraid to just invite chaos, and then you can always strip it back from there, but you may as well go all in rather than sort of approach it kind of like a little mouse and nervously. Just go all in, make something ridiculous, and then strip away the parts that don't work.
Yeah. And then the last thing that we, when we were kind of thinking about what we would say today, we asked people about their ideas, and our grand idea was that we would get people into breakout rooms and have you kind of give you an opportunity to chat about some of your ideas. I think breakout rooms is not going to be possible because we're also YouTube streaming, but we had some lovely ideas that got sent in to us, you know, just for ideas for documentaries. And Rezi, will we invite people if they want to talk about their ideas, or should we say?
Yeah, I will. How about if I stop sharing? Does that work? If I stop sharing, then we should be able to see everybody, and then people can kind of unmute if they want to talk about their idea, or people can ask questions, or we could just pick one of these.
Open the space.
Let me stop sharing, and then we'll see how that goes.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you. So
if people want to, feel free to turn on your cameras. But yeah, the idea of this part was if people wanted to share ideas for work that they're kind of in the process of making, if that's scary, then we could just talk about, you know, if people have questions, now would be a cool chance to ask. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, how are you guys? Thanks for that. It was fantastic to so many similarities in your process to mine that I haven't actually heard very often. So I just wanted to ask you a question, if you don't mind, about preparing your contributors. I think you said one of you was on social media and the other one was on Umpty Billion Charities. I find my most recent work has dealt with some really quite vulnerable people, and I take that responsibility really, really seriously. And I find those two to be poles apart. The social media thing is very, you're very scary and you're very on your own, and that whole responsibility is yours. With the charity option, I often find that it's hard to dissociate the contributor from the agenda of the charity, even if that's very, very well intentioned. And I just wondered how you guys have found that experience.
Do you want to go first, Rezi?
I think, I don't know. I guess it was Phoebe that did the charity side in this when it came to kind of county lines. On the social media side, I just was, I think, just really kind of open to people, like, you know, would you be up for having a little chat with me? And, you know, obviously it's your life and I've got no right to sort of come barging in and demanding that you tell me all about it. So please don't worry if you wouldn't be up for it. I think the kind of people that we found on social media were the ones who were like desperately tweeting, I want people to understand what this is like, or so it wasn't just sort of kind of like, we weren't doorstepping people and sort of like barging our way into their trauma necessarily. It was people who'd already kind of said that they wanted to provide some sort of lived experience and share their lived experience. And then I don't know, honestly, it's Jessie Lawson and Arlie Adlington are always sitting there on my shoulder. Like, does this person deserve your trust? Do they deserve your trust? Like, what can you do to be just honest with them, as honest as possible about what might happen, what might not happen? Also things like when it comes to anonymity, being really clear what anonymity means, and, you know, how you're not completely anonymous if someone that you know recognizes you on the radio, and so on and so forth. There's just like a lot of things that you just have to really, really, really consider, and then just don't make any promises except for the promise that you're going to treat them with respect, I suppose.
I'm always really concerned about the motivation. I try to talk to them a lot about, why are you doing this? Sharing your story just sometimes doesn't seem quite enough, and I often find there's a similarity in the type of contributor that I will get to. It's a certain sort of personality, and probably the personality that I want to speak to is the one that won't respond to the comment or stuff like that. But I guess that's the difficulty of the game. And yeah, I personally find you know, at least 2 pre-interview conversations, if not more, but, you know, one about the story, and then another very strong one about, have you thought about all of the possible fallout of what this could mean? But yeah, it was really great to hear how you take that really seriously. I just think it's a really important part, and they're good people.
I think, Kelly, as well, with some of the charities that we spoke to, maybe you're right, often you get a kind of forward-facing person to begin with, and we were just quite upfront about, you know, saying that we wanted to talk with people who had direct experience. So in the case of one of the charities, they then put me onto Reese, who's the kind of younger boy who you hear in the documentary, and initially they wanted to do a kind of group call, and then I said, is it okay if Reese and I just chat, just so that we could have more of a one-on-one? So I think maybe, yeah, we were trying to be really kind of clear in our communication right from the beginning. So I'm not sure if that helps, but we also sent out so many emails, and I think so many people didn't respond. So I think that you have to kind of go overboard almost to get contributors.
I had that exact situation on my last series, where 2 members of the charity were sitting in on a Zoom call, and it was, you know, I really respected this charity. They didn't have an agenda, though. It was from a safeguarding point of view that they could do that. You could just tell, but you have to eventually give the person the responsibility for their own voice. It just felt like they were taking that away from them. And at the end of the day, when you open the mic, you say what you're going to say, and you have to have confidence in that. You can't have, you know, mother sitting on your shoulder. So yeah, I totally agree that it needs to be between the producer and the contributor at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else have any questions or want to share any ideas? I think if not, then we can. Oh, hey, Jack.
It's not about starting, it's about ending. So what happens if you get to the end of your collaborative documentary and then you've got a disagreement? How do you resolve the creative disagreement and
I need to know that.
Make the final decision?
Have we ever had any major creative disagreements? I don't know that we have. I don't know, because I think that the whole like none of it comes out of nowhere. Every tiny thing is a decision and a choice and an agreement. So nothing kind of just comes out of absolutely nowhere. I think in the case of County Lines, it initially, or I'll say initially, you know, like version 2000 or something, had like a really nice positive ending and like a really lovely redemptive arc. And it was our exec Alan, wasn't it, who was like, just dirty it up a little bit, just, you know, like we don't want everybody to really switch on and then just go away going, oh, but it all worked out in the end, so it's fine. You know, you need to leave people feeling unsettled. And I think we just both agreed with that, didn't we? I don't know.
Yeah, we went through, I feel, hundreds of different endings. I always find endings the hardest thing to do anyway, but I feel in terms of kind of I think because we went so hard into the experimental, you know, we went through so many different versions that we had so many different, we were kind of so on board with the different kind of ways that it could be, or but I think if you're doing a really kind of engaged collaborative experience, then you almost start to share the same mind in a way. Not quite, but I don't know, you can kind of refer back to things and you understand what the other person is saying, which makes it really exciting.
Sounds nice.
I don't know if that answers it properly, but yeah.
We'll let you know if we have any major fallouts in future. We'll like come back to the group and say, all right, this is how we resolved it. We've got a question from YouTube, which is in the comments, from Andre, which is what are our fave sound design tricks?
Oh, I think it's always putting a resonant low pass
filter. That is it. That's it. On absolutely everything. Yeah.
I think also GarageBand for me. I love playing on GarageBand and you know, seeing what sound effects you can make just with your voice, because you can spend ages trawling on the internet for sounds that aren't quite right, but if you can, you know, have a little fun and see if you can make it with your own voice or with something in the room, I think that can be really cool. And then there's another question: how do you balance the ever-consuming creative process, time management and deadlines to prevent overproducing or wasted time? From Matt.
Well, I think when we work together collaboratively, there probably is wasted time, but we wouldn't call it wasted time. It's all sort of part of making it. You obviously can't do it on absolutely every project that you work on. And sometimes you need to just do an interview and put some music underneath and just get it out there. And you will definitely have those projects. But I think the ones that are really kind of meaningful, it's just all part of working to kind of make the thing that we want to listen to, the thing that we want to hear, and the thing that feels the most impactful.
I'd say the same. I think in these kind of projects, there's a lot of kind of care. So there is a lot of backwards and forwards. But sometimes, you do find yourself perhaps overproducing, and you go back to an idea that you had ages ago, maybe in one of the first kind of iterations. So I guess the important thing there is to make sure that you're saving all of the different kind of ideas that you have, so that if you do in the end think, oh God, what I had all along was actually better, that you can find it. So really, I'm not the best at it, but kind of having a real space where you're collecting all your ideas and sounds, all of your interviews. The transcripts are really helpful, having a transcript, because that makes the editing process a lot quicker for us. We can just highlight on the transcript, I'm not sure about this line, can we bring back in this, instead of having to kind of edit it all and then decide that, you know, I think the transcript is probably what I would say. That's the biggest time saver. Question: do you have any advice regarding taking an idea and then approaching potential commissioners, etc. with it? Any top tips?
No. I don't know, that's really, really hard, isn't it, with commissioners, because they want to I think what we've just spent like an hour doing is saying like, just start from nowhere and see where you go, and eventually you'll find the right thing. But there's no commissioner in the world that wants to hear that, right? So it's difficult. It's really, really difficult. In fact, we were talking earlier today, weren't we, how you spend like a lot of time kind of developing ideas and trying to sort of put them together so that commissioners might find them interesting. And then they're just like, nah, you just don't even hear any sort of feedback on why. I'm just going to go on mute and let Phoebe talk because my feral children are going absolutely feral.
The only thing I would add to that is I think Redzi and I have been lucky in working with people who've kind of supported us in coming with an initial idea and kind of not having an absolute sense of where we're going to kind of end up with it. So there's been a bit of luck for us in that. But I think we will always have an idea to begin with of who we're going to speak to, and we'll have done some of the kind of reaching out and maybe even potential interviewing before we kind of approach a commissioner with an idea. So we kind of work backwards probably quite a bit in that respect, in terms of, because I think all of that, although it can feel a bit like time wasting if you're doing interviews before you've begun, it helps consolidate the idea and helps you to understand what it is that you're actually interested in saying.
And it's so worth mentioning shortcuts in that regard as well. Like if you're not on their email that they send out to, you know, to sort of like let you know what themes they're interested in every series, and you can kind of pitch to those. I think somewhere like that is just a much more open space to kind of let slightly experimental or not quite fully formed ideas come through, and then that help. I think, you know, I think that's what we're learning, isn't it? We're trying to get better at putting pictures together and trying to think ahead of time how things will sound, and shortcuts has been a really good sort of proving ground for us. Even just the practice of pitching is incredible. So if you're not on that email list, get on it, and we'll stick that in the document that Sarah can send out to everybody afterwards as well.
And Shortcuts, for people who don't know, is on BBC Radio 4, and it's a half-hour programme, and it's a kind of experimental slot where they send out themes on different subjects like symbols and signs and desire, and then you have to send in a pitch, but it's very informal, so it's a great place to start practicing your pitching skills. And then they will commission it if they like it, and you'll get some money, and you'll produce a 5 to 10 minute piece. And again, those short pieces sometimes then form longer pieces. I'd also say Transom can give really good opportunities. That was one of the first pieces that I made, was sending in a piece that I'd already made into Transom, and then they took it. And then you kind of skip the pitching process altogether if you do something like that. So yeah, if you've got things that you've already made, still worth sending them out, I think. Nice. Anyone else? Questions?
Any more?
Otherwise, I guess I'd say, again, group up, work with people. That can be really helpful for forming your pitches and your ideas. Yeah, we love collaboration. So I think that would be the main theme of any talk that we give. What tool do you transcript as you go? I collaborate with a non-audio trained partner and find Descript really useful. I would say I also use Descript. Redzi, what do you use for transcripts?
Yeah, Descript and Trint as well. It's quite good. Yes, and I'm just about to send the SurveyMonkey link through again, so I'll do that now. Hold on one sec.
But yeah, we hope it's given you a flavour of how also sometimes out of slight chaos and confusion, you can make interesting things. And that, you know, you do sometimes go through many different iterations until you arrive at what you want. But don't be afraid of that process, I think, is what I'd end up by saying, and have we hope you have fun with it.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Have a
Thanks
nice evening. Bye.
Ciao, ciao.